the beginning of 2010, Alex and I felt that we were ready to begin our family. That turned out to be a much harder and longer journey than we had planned. We had a hard time getting pregnant. We had to have many tests, put on fertility medicines. We were clients at a fertility center. But praise God, in late 2011, we found out that we were pregnant. The 17 months that it took us to get pregnant were really, really difficult. It's hard to want something so badly and not know if God has that planned for you. I don't know what everyone here is going through, but I want to share something with you. It's a statement that I was taught a few years ago, and it's really helped me. The statement is, God is very predictable and that He will always meet your needs. But He is very unpredictable in how He chooses to meet your needs and when He chooses to meet your needs. If you're struggling with fertility, if you hate your job and you feel trapped, if you or a loved one is experiencing health problems, if you're single and you don't want to be, if you're in a situation that you hate, please hear that statement. I'm going to say it again because I want you to take it to heart. God is very predictable and that He will always meet your needs. But He is very unpredictable on how He chooses to meet them and when He chooses to meet your needs. On May 24th, 2012, our daughter Madeline Grace Flora was born. She was perfect. She was adorable. She looked just like Alex. We knew that having a baby would be a big adjustment to our lives, but the first 4 weeks that we had her were nothing like we thought they'd be. For the first 3 days, she just slept a lot. She hardly cried. But after those first 3 days, she changed. She cried all the time. She didn't sleep. She had at least 8 poopy diapers a day. She ate really well, but when she wasn't sleeping or eating, she had this miserable look on her face. She wasn't gaining weight, so her pediatrician had us add formula into her eating schedule because they feared that my breast milk didn't have the nutrients that she needed. She was like the way I just described for about 3 weeks. Then during the 4th week, things changed. She just slept all the time. She didn't cry as much, and at that time, I thought that meant she was feeling better. Looking back, I now realize that she was so depleted that she didn't have any energy left to cry. All she could do was sleep. The day before she turned 4 weeks old, I received a phone call from her pediatrician. When he called me, I was sitting in my office editing pictures on my computer, and Madeline was asleep in her bouncer next to my chair. He told me that her newborn screening heel stick test showed that she might have cystic fibrosis, and that he'd made us an appointment for the next day at Children's Hospital in Birmingham. I had never heard really of cystic fibrosis before, and I didn't know anything about it. So right when I got off the phone, I looked up cystic fibrosis on the computer. Do not do that. Anytime you find out about any illness, don't look it up, because it just makes things so worse. But the first thing that I read on the computer was that cystic fibrosis is a terminal disease, and then in the 1980s, most babies who were born with cystic fibrosis lived to an average age of 2 or 3 years old. I then read that with modern technology and with treatments, the life expectancy now was 37 years old. I immediately picked up my cell phone and I called Alex, my husband, at work, and he had just gotten off the phone with our pediatrician too. He had called him as well. And I said, Alex, Dr. Peter said that Madeline might have cystic fibrosis. And he said, Holly, we don't know that yet, and either way, it's going to be okay. See, he hadn't had time to look it up yet, so he didn't know what that was either. Well, then I screamed into the phone, you die from cystic fibrosis. And he just went silent. I started crying, and I told him I needed him to come home. He said he was on his way. When I got off the phone with Alex, I immediately dropped to my knees, and I picked Madeline up and I just squeezed her so tight, and I started screaming and praying out loud. And isn't it wonderful when what we're saying makes no sense and we're just making those sounds? God translates that. He knows the words we mean. I prayed and I begged him, please don't let her have cystic fibrosis. Looking back at that moment, I notice now, I didn't notice it then, that during me being so loud and chaotic and squeezing her to death, she never woke up. She just slept. And that wasn't pretty normal. But I had never been a mom before, and I didn't know what normal was. I'd not been around many newborns, so I didn't know how a baby was supposed to act. I had just thought that we had a fussy baby and that my milk wasn't good. I honestly didn't know anything was wrong. So the next morning we headed to Children's Hospital. Right when we pulled into the parking deck, I saw parents getting their kids out of their vehicles and going into the hospital. Some of the kids were in wheelchairs. And I turned and looked at Alex when he parked the car and I said, I do not want to be one of these families. I don't want Madeline to come here all the time. But as a lot of you know, we turned out to be one of those families. When we got settled into the hospital, they did a sweat test on Madeline, and that test confirmed that she had cystic fibrosis. When the nurse came in to give us her test results and tell us the news, I remember her saying that Madeline had cystic fibrosis, but then I don't remember anything else that she said after that. The only thing I remember is that I kept thinking over and over, I can't feel my feet. Why are my feet numb? And then I look at her and think, why am I not crying? She's going to think I don't love my baby. Why are my feet numb? It was the weirdest moment that I guess I went into shock, but I don't remember her talking. I remember seeing her talk, but nothing came in. Alex asked the nurse something, and that kind of brought me back into that moment. I remember that the nurse looked at me and she said, I know that this is so much for you to take in right now, and after you've had time to think, you'll have a lot more questions. But do you have any questions for me right now? I looked at her and I started crying and I said, how will we know if she's dying? And will she be in a lot of pain? She does die. At that moment, I just remember being terrified we were going to take her home and she'd die. The nurse gave me a really compassionate smile and she said, most of the time, when it's time for a person with CF to die, their lungs aren't working and they suffocate. But they're usually in the hospital before that happens. And what happens usually is that they're so low on oxygen, they're so tired and weak that they go to sleep and then they just don't wake back up. And then she enthusiastically said, but we have a lot of our patients who are in high school right now. And I remember thinking, I never thought that we'd rejoice that our daughter just made it to high school age. What happened next was truly such a blessing. The hospital CF medical team then jumped into action and they started training Alex and me on how we could take care of Madeline. It was so good for us. It gave us something to do and something to focus on. The last person to see her on the team was Madeline's head CF doctor. He came in and he gave her a physical. She slept during everything. It was during that checkup that I feel like I really saw her for the first time and saw how sick she was for the first time. She was gray-colored. Her bones were sticking out on her skull. When she was born, she weighed 7 pounds and 15 ounces. And that day, 4 weeks later, she weighed 6 pounds, 3 ounces. Her doctor told us that we were coming back in a week for our cystic fibrosis training day, that we should bring our families with us. But on that day, they were also going to weigh her again. And if she had not gained enough weight, they were going to admit her into the hospital. So we went home and we started implementing the things that we learned that day. One of the biggest things that we learned that day was that Madeline couldn't digest any of the milk that we'd been giving her. All it was doing was making her have a severe stomach ache. Just putting her in a lot of pain. She got the water out of the milk, but none of the nutrients. Cystic fibrosis stops her body from producing enzymes, and these enzymes break down food. So we had to start giving her enzymes in a pill form before she would eat anything, and that's how we still have to feed her, and that's how she'll always have to eat. She'll have to take her enzyme pills first, and then she can digest food. Or most of the food. She'll never digest everything. It was incredible how she changed after taking enzymes. If you'll go back to that picture that has the 3 pictures, I hope y'all can see this pretty good. These are pictures from my cell phone. You can see in the corner, you can see her arms and her legs. That was 8 days before starting enzymes. That's before we knew anything. I thought I was feeding her there, but she wasn't able to digest any of that. The next one is her sitting on Alex's sleeping against his chest. That's 4 days before we started enzymes. We didn't know anything. You could see her coloring, and that was the expression she had on her face all the time. And that's how she was the whole week before we found out. She just slept all the time. And then on the bottom one, you can see that's just 1 week after we started enzymes. She's just, you can tell so much. I mean, she'd stretch. She used to stay all balled up, but she'd stretch, and her color came back, and her face just filled out. It was amazing. She gained 1 pound a week for the first 4 weeks. And her color came back, and we saw her for the first time feeling content and feeling happy. If you'll go back to that picture of just Madeline where she's just smiling. Thank you. Cystic fibrosis mainly affects Madeline's pancreas and her lungs. We do physiotherapy every day on Madeline for her lungs. CF causes Madeline's body to produce this extremely thick, sticky mucus, and it clogs up her lungs. And it can also lead to her having lung infections. So we use an inhaler and a chamber on her, and then we hit her in 6 places on her ribs. But there's a right way to do it. It doesn't hurt her. We cup our hand like this, and we hit her that hard, which when we were doing this to a 5-week-old, you're like, and they told us at first, you know how hard to hit her is, you have to make her cheeks jiggle. And thankfully, she'd been on enzymes for a week when we started to do PT on her, and I was thankful for that week because before then nothing would have jiggled. We probably would have just hit her too much. But it was hard at first. It was like hitting Jell-O because she just wiggled everywhere. She hated it. She screamed and cried. We hit her in 6 places on her ribs for 20 minutes, and we do it twice a day. If she's got a lung infection, we can do it up to 4 times a day. Basically, we're just trying to loosen anything that's in her lungs so she can cough it up. It's amazing now. She has gotten so used to this that when she was 2 months old, she'd gotten used to it. She'll watch TV. She'll talk to us. She sings with us. She'll fall asleep half the time during PT, which is amazing to me, but it's just something comforting and soothing to her now. She doesn't know any different. When she's older, she'll get a vest, and it'll take the place of us doing her hand physiotherapy. It'll vibrate her and make that mucus loosen up. When Madeline was 4 months old, I had scheduled 2 photography sessions in Rome, Georgia on a Saturday. I was excited about the sessions because other than going to Children's Hospital, Madeline's pediatrician, and pharmacies, I hadn't left the house much. I'd scheduled the 2 sessions to where I'd have about 3 hours in between them, and I knew what I was going to do with that time. I was going to eat at my most favorite place ever, which is Panera Bread. Can I get a whoop whoop? Yes. And I was going to run over to Pier 1 and Barnes & Noble and just browse. After my first session, I went to Panera Bread to eat. I got my food and I sat down at one of the tables. When I sat down, I looked up to see a husband and wife who had just sat down, and the wife was holding a baby. It was a beautiful baby girl. 2 minutes later, another woman came in and sat down at the table next to them, and she was holding a baby carrier. Once she got settled, she picked up her infant son from the carrier, and the other woman with the baby daughter said, "He's so cute, how old is he?" And that woman said, "He's 2 months old, how old is yours?" And the other woman said, "She's 6 months old, oh, she's growing too fast." And as these ladies continued talking, I watched both of them get out bottles and just start feeding their babies. As I sat there watching, I thought, I wish I could just open up the bottle and feed Madeline. I'd have to sanitize the table and set up a workstation and then give her her enzymes and her applesauce and make her concentrated formula and add her special vitamins to it and add her salt, and then I'd have to make sure she drank it all before her enzymes ran out. Basically, I sat there and I felt sorry for myself. At that time in my life, I was mentally at a low point. Being told that your daughter has a short life expectancy because of a disease that she got from you and from your husband is a hard thing. It's hard to accept. I was also dealing with a lot of guilt. I felt unbelievably guilty that she was so miserable and starving for the first month of her life, and I didn't know. I didn't know she was starving because when you feed your baby over and over, you think she's eating. So I felt a lot of guilt. When we found out what was going on and how bad she was, because she was really bad. And I was also grieving at that time, because not only was I sad for Madeline and all that she was going to have to deal with and go through, I was grieving because I felt like all of our children had just died. You see, Alex and I, we wanted to have more children. A lot of you know my sister. She's my best friend. I wanted Madeline to have that. But when we found out that Alex and I were carriers of the cystic fibrosis gene, our first reaction was, we can't have any more children. We don't want to do this to them. And I was constantly at that time thinking thoughts like this. Will Madeline have to have a lung transplant when she's older? A lot of CF patients, when they get older, their lungs just give out, and so they're put on the donor list. I do like this: if they get their lungs, they call them angel wings, because that's the scar that it leaves on them. And I'll constantly think, what if she gets put on the donor list and she never gets lungs? Then I think about, for her to have lungs, somebody else would have to die. I thought about, will she ever get married? At that time, her average life expectancy was 37 years. I worried what would happen if she fell in love, and then she told him that she may not live to be 40. Would he stay? I thought about her having children. Research has shown that giving birth will decrease her lung functionality. So will she have children? Will I have grandchildren? I worried all the time about her getting sick. What if she got the flu and her body couldn't bounce back from it? What if she cultures something at her next appointment? And I'd constantly worry, how long is she going to be here with us? Will this be the last birthday? Will this be the last time we get to do whatever with her? Will she live to high school age? Should I put her to school? There'd be so many germs. Should we homeschool her? I thought about her medical team, how they encouraged us that every year from October through March we needed to keep her at home unless she's going to doctor's appointments. I thought, how are we going to make that work? I worried about Madeline and what she would do if she was unable to get enzymes. What if there was a catastrophe, like a tornado or a terrorist attack, and she couldn't get her enzymes? How's she going to eat? What if they couldn't get her medications for some reason? You know, it's sad all the places that your mind will go if you let it. We really can make ourselves sick with worry. I was consumed with these thoughts. I didn't really talk about things much with others, except for Alex. I really tried to stay hopeful and write things to other people, but my mind was so down and scared, and I complained a lot to myself. So I sat there at Panera. I had all of these thoughts already growing in my mind, and I sat there feeling sorry for Madeline and sorry for myself. And all of a sudden I heard God say to me, "Stop it. That is enough." I remember that I was a little startled by that. So I just sat there and I listened. And this is what I felt God say to me: "Holly, you complain about giving your daughter enzymes so that she can eat. I wonder how many mothers from the 1980s and earlier whose children basically starved to death and died from malnutrition would have gladly given their children thousands of pills a day to keep their children alive. You should be so thankful that I've provided you a way to feed Madeline. Enzymes are miracles. Those pills allow her to eat." And you talk about conviction. I was so ashamed. I didn't eat. I just sat there and I listened and I thought. I sat there for 2.5 hours. And during that time, God really changed my thinking and my attitude. He told me that I was failing in one key area as a mother. Yes, it's our job as parents to keep our children safe, feed them, clothe them, take them to their checkups, teach them to talk and to read. But it is also our job to teach them how they should view things, how they should think about things. We are to teach them to be joyful and have faith and trust in God. And it's not just through our words. They learn so much more from watching us, from listening to us, and seeing how we handle things and how we view things. God told me that if I didn't change my mindset, I was going to raise a complainer. I would raise Madeline to feel like a martyr and that she'd been cheated. I did not want to do that. I didn't want to raise a girl or a woman who others dreaded seeing coming, because she'd always be down. She'd always be complaining and feeling sorry for herself. God also asked me a question that day. He said, Holly, if I lined up a row of completely healthy babies and I put Madeline in that row and said, you can pick any child that you want to be your son or your daughter, who would you pick? I immediately thought, Madeline. I want Madeline. I would pick Madeline. I then felt God show me that if I thought about the things that we have to do to take care of Madeline as burdens, that as Madeline grew up, she would feel like she too was a burden to us. I've been so different since that day. My mindset has been different, and it's completely because of God. The day after my experience at Panera, I started saying to Madeline before I give her each enzyme, praise God for enzymes. And I love Laurel, my friend that came with me. She keeps Madeline 2 days a week for me. And she too says, praise God for enzymes. So I'm just waiting for Madeline to say it. Right now, half the words don't make sense, but I know in her soul she's speaking these words. I even had her an enzyme bowl made. You know, you can go get the pottery done with the handprints. Don't you love it? I got a bowl that has her 2 handprints on the side like she's holding the bowl, and on the bowl it says, praise God for enzymes. In that bowl, we throw her empty enzyme pill capsules. And I want her to view those enzymes and her medicines as gifts. They're miracles. I want her to have a good attitude. I know she's going to have some bad days. I have bad days too. I mainly have bad days. When I hear about a child or a person with cystic fibrosis dying, or about a CF child who's in the hospital, I get scared when I hear that another CF person's lungs are shutting down and they've been added to the donor list. At those times I let myself cry and be sad. But I do not let myself stay there. So I know Madeline's going to have some bad days or bad weeks. And I'll let her grieve, I'll hold her, and I'll be patient. But I do not want her to stay there. I want her to know that she is a blessing, not a burden. And that God has a reason for everything. God has a plan for her life and a purpose for her. I want her to know that she was fearfully and wonderfully made. I want her to be joyful and know that she was not cheated, she was chosen. She was not cheated, she was chosen. That's true for you. I don't know what situation God has put you in that you may not be fond of. But please know, you've not been cheated. You've been chosen. And that's true for Alex and me too. We weren't cheated. We were chosen. We were chosen to be her parents. And I thank God for choosing us. I praise Him for giving her to us. She is absolutely the perfect daughter for us in every way. Now, I told you that Alex, my first reaction to finding out that we were carriers of the cystic fibrosis gene was that we couldn't have any more children. I felt that way for around 7 months, but at the beginning of 2013, I really wanted to have another baby. I just started feeling that way, that I want us to have another child. And I prayed about it. I worried that if we ever tried to have another baby, we'd be being irresponsible or selfish. There is 1 in 4 chance that our second child will have cystic fibrosis. We didn't know that we were carriers of the gene when we had Madeline, but we knew now. Was it wrong to have another child that we knew might have a harder life or an early death because of a gene that we would pass on to them? I asked our parents what they thought. I asked Madeline's CF medical team and her pediatrician. I asked our friends. I prayed for months, and I never heard anything from God. It just felt like He was silent about it, and I so wanted a yes or a no answer. Well, one day I was sitting on the couch in our house, and Madeline was asleep in her play garden. I had the TV off, and I was just sitting there in silence. And I prayed, "Dear God, I really need an answer. Can we try to have another child? Is that wrong? Please, please tell me." And at that moment, God answered my question with another question. I felt Him say, "Holly, what will you tell Madeline?" And my first thought was, what will I tell her about what? I do that a lot. God has to spell things out for me frequently. And I felt Him then say, "When Madeline is older, and she asks you why she doesn't have a brother or a sister, what will you tell her? Will you tell her that you and Alex didn't want to try because you were afraid you'd have another child like her?" And I immediately thought, no, I could never tell her that. She might think that we wouldn't have had her if we had known that she had CF. And that is not the case. She is our blessing. She is our answer to prayer. We wanted her. We still want her. We will always want her. I sat there and I thought about that for a while. I felt that God had given me my answer. He is in charge of life. If Alex and I were never meant to have another baby, He wouldn't let a baby be created. No baby is an accident. If He didn't have another baby for us, I could answer Madeline's question of, why don't I have a brother or sister with? We really wanted to have another baby, and we tried to, but God didn't have another child for us. He just wanted us to have you. You are enough. But as you can see, God did have another baby for us. It's amazing how things come about too. I didn't have this in my notes, but I was going to share with you. When Alex and I decided, okay, let's try to have another baby, we decided, we had such a hard time getting pregnant with Madeline. We had to do so many fertility things. We thought, we're open to having another baby. We want another baby, but we're not going to do fertility treatments again. And I'll tell you, the first month we got pregnant. And it just felt like God saying, yes. I'm 4 months pregnant now. In a few weeks, we're going to have the option of having our doctor do a CF test on the baby while I'm pregnant. But we've decided to not have the test. If the test could help our baby or prevent disease, we of course would do it. But this test would only let us know if the baby has CF or not. It wouldn't change anything. Honestly, this test is usually done so that the parents can decide if they'd like to have an abortion or not. We do not need to take this test. Another reason we're declining the test is that anytime a needle is injected into the uterus, there's a potential for infection or for a miscarriage. And it's not worth us to threaten our babies. It's not worth it to us to threaten our baby's life in any way, just so we can find out just a little bit sooner, does the child have CF or not. We've also decided that we are not going to find out the gender of this baby. Now, to be honest, I had always thought that people who did not find out the gender were crazy. How many of you did not find out the gender of your baby? I did not understand you at all. With Madeline, I had to know. I wanted to know. Is she a girl? Was it a boy? I could not wait. But now I am really, really trying to give up all of my control feelings and just completely trust God and have faith in Him throughout this whole pregnancy. And another thing we feel is that us wondering about the gender, it'll give us something else to dwell on and think about instead of constantly obsessing with the thought, does this baby have CF? It'll give us something else to think about. But the truth is, if this baby does have cystic fibrosis, that means that we're going to have another fantastic baby just like our Madeline, and I say, bring that baby on. In closing, I'd like to thank everyone for allowing me to be here and share my testimony and to share about our daughter Madeline. I'd like to thank Aaron Young for inviting me and allowing me to do this. And I know that most of you have never met Madeline, but I also know that a lot of you have prayed for her. You've prayed for us, and I can't thank you enough. We feel the prayers. We need the prayers. And I personally think that God is going above and beyond and just showing out on her, which I say, yes, go ahead. But I know that is because of your prayers, and I thank you. Please continue to pray for her and pray for other children, other people who deal with terminal diseases. And please pray for their families. Please pray that their families will have a good mindset. Please pray that Christ is in those homes. Because a family really does shape the way that children like Madeline are going to grow up and view themselves.